Hello, and thank you for attending the first of our webinar series for 2017. It's titled Establishing Impact with Data. I am Anthony Radich, the Executive Director of WESTAF, the Western State Arts Federation. Joining me today are Matt Harris, the Director of the Iowa Arts Council. Hello, Matt.
Hello.
And economist Brian Points. Hello, Brian.
Hello.
Today we want to talk a little bit about how to position data, and of course we're in a cycle, as most of those on the line know, of intensive advocacy for the National Endowment for the Arts. Very important that we be present in that conversation, and of course an expectation in the field and beyond is that we have data to support what we're advocating for, and there's a lot of data out there. WESTAF has had the Creative Vitality Suite, also known as the CVSuite, for a number of years. The CVSuite is an interactive tool that allows you to access a great number of streams of data about the for-profit and non-profit dimensions of the creative economy. And you can pull reports from it. You can compare communities within it. And I think it's one of its strongest features is that it can be used in a way that allows you to look at data on a zip code level, an MSA level, a county level, a state level, a national level. So that's pretty unique in terms of the structure of that tool. We recently added ethnicity data, and I think we're going to see a lot of use of ethnicity data to talk about who's working in the creative economy these days and how do we attract new people and what kind of diversity exists in the creative economy. There tends to be a lot of confusion in the field about exactly what data stream is to be used for what. And I just talked a little bit about the Creative Vitality Suite, but there are some others that are commonly referred to in this work. One is the Americans for the Arts Art and Economic Prosperity tool, and this is one that is prepared with through a survey system and audience intercept system to estimate the number of dollars people spend on attendant activities when they join a performing arts event. And this is done approximately every 5 years. And the new one is coming out, and it's a useful tool, but I want to note to our audience that oftentimes it can be a little out of date because it is only done once in a while, and we find that people increasingly are seeking up-to-date materials. We also have in the field a product put out by the National Endowment for the Arts and the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and this is a way of estimating the overall size of the creative economy in the United States. Great tool using some new data sources. It's available on a national numbers level and now at a state numbers level, but not able yet to be broken down into zip code, MSA, et cetera, like CVSuite. So great tool, but some limitations on that one. So those are just three of the things, and unfortunately there tends to be confusion about them. So let me go to our guest today. With us today is Matthew Harris. He's the Director of the Iowa Arts Council, and he will be interviewed by economist and labor market data expert Brian Points. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for sharing your insights. Brian, do you want to talk a bit about your background and experience with the creative labor market data before we get started with the Matt interview?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Anthony. So my experience spans an array of topics in economics and economic development, including things from strategic planning, economic impact analysis, benefit cost analysis, surveys and focus groups, a number of things. I've assisted a lot of economic development entities and things related to arts and otherwise. In particular, things related to arts advocacy. I've worked with the Houston Arts Alliance, the Kentucky Arts Council, and the Mississippi Arts Commission, among others. I'm also helping WESTAF do some research around the Creative Vitality Suite most recently. And although I'm not very artistic myself, I do enjoy drawing animals for my 4 children and letting them try to figure out what they are.
Thanks, Brian. Before I turn this over to you, I want to tell our attendees that the webinar will be approximately 30 minutes in length. And following the presentation, we'll have time for questions. And you'll see in the box on the screen, upper left-hand side, that you can sign up for questions, and we'll take those at the conclusion of the formal webinar. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining us and turn to Brian to start our interview of Matt Harris.
Thank you, Anthony. So we'll jump right into it here. Matt, can you tell us a bit about yourself and about your goals as an arts organization?
Sure, Brian. Thanks to you and Anthony for letting me be on the call today. As Anthony shared, I'm the director of the Iowa Arts Council, and we serve as Iowa's state arts agency as a division of a larger umbrella organization, the Iowa Department of Cultural Affairs, which oversees our sister divisions, the State Historical Society of Iowa, as well as our State Office of Media Production. But it's the mission of the Iowa Arts Council to cultivate creativity, learning, and participation in the arts. And we do that in support of the department's overarching mission to empower Iowa to build and sustain culturally vibrant communities. So in 2017, we are embarking on the 50th anniversary of the Iowa Arts Council, but we are doing so amid some of our own state budget challenges and, of course, the larger debate around the future of the National Endowment for the Arts. So I think articulating a compelling argument for public support of the arts has probably never been more important than it is today.
Yeah, certainly it is a topic a lot of us are dealing with. And can you tell us a bit about how you engage with data and which data you use?
Sure. So our primary data sets include our own internal data collection from our grantees and the various programs that we administer, but as well as the federal data that we are required to report to the NEA. These are data sets that we primarily track internally within our Salesforce platform. However, we do draw from a variety of third-party data sources, such as Americans for the Arts, the NEA's satellite account portal that Anthony described earlier, and of course the CVSuite, which we've made a commitment to investing in as an agency. So as a division of state government, it's important to note that much of the data that we at the Arts Council have to collect and manage ourselves is pretty much collected in a relative vacuum that doesn't necessarily provide context for the work that we do. So that's where we look to our third-party data sources to really supplement what we collect to help us tell a more complete story about the impact we have and the environment in which we operate as we work to support the arts in Iowa. And Brian, I would also add that, with access to the amount of data that is available today across all these sources, we also try to be careful in the data that we put out. Different data sources all collect and present their information slightly differently, which, from an arts standpoint can be a hurdle at times for those of us in the field trying to tell a cohesive story of impact with a common data language. And admittedly, we tend to be a little gun-shy when it comes to third-party data, just simply because, we don't consider ourselves the experts. So we try to take a straightforward approach and just present the statistics that require, minimal explanation or context, and that we know might resonate with our audience and be easy for them to absorb. This, I think, allows us to focus more on the message rather than just the numbers themselves. So when it comes to the CVSuite, we feel better with guidance from the WESTAF team to help remind us of the source and methodology of the data, so we can more confidently use the data to support what it is we're trying to say.
Great, thanks, Matt. And you mentioned the word story there a couple of times. That's a theme we'll come back to a few times during this conversation, the first one right now. So I want to ask you, who does your organization service, and what audience do you communicate that data-driven story to?
Sure. So as a state agency, we're obviously funded through taxpayer dollars, so it can easily feel like our audience is everybody. So it's all taxpayers. So for us, it's important to know who our audience is in a given situation, and then tailor our message accordingly, while also trying to strive for some degree of overall message consistency. But I would probably break our audiences down in three ways. In no particular order. First off, elected officials, of course, since we are a government agency. This would include primarily the Iowa legislature as our largest funder, as well as Iowa's congressional delegation because of our NEA and federal funding, and then to a lesser degree, but still relevant, our locally elected officials. Next, I would say the Iowa arts community, of course, a key audience of ours, which encompasses everything from individual artists to nonprofit arts leaders and organizations, as well as related stakeholders. And last, but of course not least, the general public, the taxpayers themselves, from whom our state and federal appropriations originate, and for whom we are ultimately working and trying to positively impact. But because of the varying interests of each of these audience types, we do have to be nimble and adapt our message, language, and our use of data accordingly. So, for instance, we frequently draw upon the total creative sector jobs figures from the CVSuite to complement messaging to the legislature in the hopes that they begin to associate arts and culture with job creation and economic growth for the state. Because for us, those are two kind of pillars that the legislature is consistently interested in. But for maybe individual legislators, we've even used the data to help reinforce or even sometimes maybe counter prevailing assumptions about the health of the creative sector in their area or in their district, drawing from CVSuite resources. So attitudes that there's no arts in my community, and maybe we can counter that. Or attitudes of assumption of economic health in the arts sector in their community, and maybe we have signs that point to the contrary. So it's helpful in both cases. But we also take requests from local communities who may have a need for a particular layer of data to support their local effort or messaging to local officials. So we try to work with them to see what our data sources can provide to help give a statewide or larger context to their local situation. And as we understand the varying interests of each audience type and communicate the message appropriately, it's important to consider that the community is interested in a place that is safe and a great environment in which to raise their kids. That might be a particular priority in that community with those leaders. So with this group, they're going to need strong messaging to rally behind so that they can use specific examples of how this is being done and how it's positively impacting the community and making it a better place to live. So you just have to zero in on who you're talking to and really calibrate your message and your data sources accordingly in those situations.
Okay, good points. And something that happens in this field of arts data research is there are different ways to slice it and to count the heads. Sometimes you're looking at artistic industries that they may not actually they may not employ a lot of individual artists. But at the core, whatever the audience you're speaking to, however you're slicing the data, you are going to be counting artists themselves. So is that something that you've looked at? Do you just count individual artists, and if so, which data do you use for that purpose?
Sure. The artists are obviously, at the core of what we talk about, and they are, living, practicing examples of, the arts for art's sake argument. So for them, we do have to remind them sometimes that they are part of something bigger, and try to put their efforts in the context of the overall creative economy in Iowa, because there is strength in those numbers. With public funding for individual artists, though, we do have to work against the assumptions of some that artists are maybe only working for themselves or creating work in a very insular environment or just relying on government subsidy to create, which we know is not the case. But some do think that. So in reality, we know that one investment or one project grant to an artist or one fellowship can engage multiple other individuals in that work, whether that's fabricators, designers, installers, curators, what have you, all well before a project even engages an even bigger public audience. So from our own internal data collection, we ask artists to help us gather that type of information on a project-by-project basis so that when we can put that in the larger context of the employment data we have access to from tools like the CVSuite. Then we can pair that macro-level statistic or talking point with a very localized, much more personal example while educating both the artist we're funding as well as the public that we're held accountable to.
And this is something you obviously have experience doing, having worked in state government for a while now. Can you give us some examples of some critical times when presenting data was really important to the success of your program or initiative?
Sure. A recent example just came actually from our Lieutenant Governor's office when they were requesting some information about the arts and the economy in Iowa because they were being asked to kind of weigh in on that subject. And so we were able to provide data on the number of creative industry jobs in the state and then use state workforce data to come up with the percentage of creative jobs that make up the total workforce. We knew that what our Lieutenant Governor's policy platforms were, so we were able to tailor the message and data accordingly. And of course, the more current the data, the better, because it helps us to be relevant in the moment and in the now.
What were your findings from that?
So we found that in the example of our Lieutenant Governor, we were able to frame the conversation using actually AFTA data to talk about specific employment of arts-related businesses, and then use the CVSuite data to talk about a broader, more holistic picture of creative occupations. We've used this approach before where we bookend the message with the arts-specific data on one end and creative economy data on the other, to help reinforce that the arts are part of a broader creative employment continuum. But practically speaking, this also helps us address and differentiate the various data sources we draw from and their potentially different methodologies. So this gives us access to really the best of both worlds, targeted arts data as well as a robust repository of in-depth data through the CVSuite.
So in your work doing this, and you're talking to people at the Capitol, talking to people across the state about arts, you were obviously interested in tying this in with the topic of economic development. And everybody's talking about job creation and how does the arts tie into that? So can you give us some examples of what have you done to make a substantive impression related to arts and economic development?
Sure. Well, I think in any of those cases, it helps to bring, I try to bring facts rooted in data, but that are paired with a tangible example the audience can connect to that helps manifest the data in a relatable way. A recent example was during our annual budget presentation to the governor and his state budget director, actually. This is a routine presentation we do every year, and for nearly 3 years, I've highlighted our Artist Fellowship Program as a key initiative of ours to help illustrate what we do and the impact that we can have. But for whatever the reason, this year it seemed to finally sink in, and our budget director was impressed, I think, by the impact of the program and the fact that our financial investment in just 5 Iowa artists in a given year through the fellowship program helped support 42 other Iowa jobs. So suddenly, I think the light went on, and the program had a new credibility in his eyes that hadn't registered in previous years. And I think I finally managed to maybe speak his language and establish connection that resonated. I just started with data that we collected from our artist grantees' final reports. on the number of jobs they help support with their project activity, and then describe the program and a framework that he could understand and relate to, such as skill development and career training, and then scaled it statewide by referencing the creative sector job numbers, which make up about 4% of the state's workforce, by the way. So this layering of data, even though it was from different sources, can still be combined with a more tangible example of, in our case, our Artist Fellowship program, using a more common language around job creation that he understood in this case, and it's that seemed to resonate.
Wow, those are pretty powerful numbers, and a good example of what you mentioned earlier about using artists themselves to provide you information that can tie this issue to the broader community and to the economy. And it doesn't take an economist to tell that that's a pretty big multiplier effect to get from 5 to 42
exactly.
jobs. So you mentioned also earlier talking to different audiences. Can you tell us in a bit more depth about how you change your message when you're speaking to the governor's office versus when you're speaking to state legislators?
Yeah, well, it just really depends. Communicating with state legislature and governor's office is often via very formal channels. So we often face very defined parameters to communicate within, just in the nature of our work as a state agency. So at the executive level, we look to the governor's overarching policy priorities for the state, such as education and job growth, increasing household incomes, making government more efficient, to try and speak to what it is we do and how we're doing it. As an executive branch agency, we do have to align with those goals anyway, so it helps to reinforce how what we do supports those bigger policy priorities. It doesn't necessarily redirect how we accomplish what we do. It just provides a framework for us to articulate our message that resonates within that structure. But for legislators, I think it's more about the local angle and how what we do is relevant to or supportive of their constituents in their districts and their local priorities. As the legislative branch, I believe they want to see return on investment from us. They want to see where we are doing good for Iowans, where we are doing it efficiently and effectively, and where we're doing it with an authentic ear to the ground. So we will often have at the ready examples of impact from their areas and their districts to try and demonstrate our resources in action.
Mm-hmm. And anybody who's ever done this kind of work of presenting stories and presenting data, you will run into people who just aren't convinced by it. So when you've dealt with elected officials who are not convinced by that story, what do you think has prompted that?
I think it comes down to the fact that if we aren't confident in what we have to say, then they will be less confident believing it. We have to be able to confidently speak to what we know, but as well as confidently speak to what we maybe don't know. Anything less or in between, I think, invokes a degree of mistrust or lack of accountability. This is why we don't hesitate to ask questions about the data that we have, whether it's the CVSuite or other data sources, just to make sure we can understand it and speak to it without taking on the burden of being the experts. Whatever the talking point, it's helpful to know the source of the information, the methodology to a certain extent, and just the context for what the data might otherwise mean or not mean. We aren't afraid to reach out to West staff whenever we have questions about the CVSuite, if we have questions, and of course they're always more than happy to provide feedback and address our questions, as hopefully any data provider would want to be.
Yeah, those are great points. You always want to lean on those who are professionals and really spend all of their time thinking about this stuff. It's the same way, even as a data person myself, it's the same way for me. So do you find that elected officials tend to think of arts and creative economy as a real power for pushing forward economic development? Or is it generally more thought of as it's nice to have if we can fit it into the budget, and it's a feel-good type of thing and makes people happy? So where on that spectrum, where do you find people?
I mean, I think I find them a little bit of all over the place, but I think it comes down to the fact that their perception of the importance of the arts to a certain degree is colored by the way we present ourselves, the way we present our data, and how we tell our story and connect to shared values. Are we presenting, clear points and clear case studies of impact? Can we cite our data and information sources? And is what we're presenting current and relevant to the current goals and initiatives of the state? The more we understand our audience and their priorities, whoever that audience is, the more credibility we can hope to achieve. I think for better or for worse, the arts, we have the burden of needing 1,000,001 reasons at the ready as to why elected officials should support what we do. But they, on the flip side, have the luxury of really only needing one good reason not to.
Yeah. So we always advise our clients and our associates who are using data to do so in conjunction with a good story. And if you look at some of the great reports that have been produced on this topic, it's a blend of those things. Nice thing about working with the arts industry is you can always find artistic people to make something graphically interesting. And if you can layer that in, good data with a good presentation and a good story, you're going to have really strong impact. So is the storytelling approach something that you use, and can you provide us some examples of that if you do?
Yes, it absolutely is. Storytelling is a major priority of ours, and a recent example for us has been how we communicate our relationship with the NEA and the impact of their federal funding on our state to our congressional delegation. When you're talking about the trickle-down impact of federal arts dollars to the state and then on to the local level, there's a whole host of statistics and percentages and kind of bureaucratic qualifiers that can really easily get in the way and risk confusing the message. So I like to think of the data and the corresponding storytelling as a funnel. For the impact of our federal funding, we just simply start at the top and work our way down, starting with the numbers Congress likely sees, such as how much money we get from the NEA. And then what does that do at the state level? Well, it triggers matching funding from the legislature. And then on down to the local level, where it attracts additional, local private matching funds. All the while narrowing the data and clarifying the message as we go until we're highlighting a very localized example of impact that we know might resonate for them and their district. And then we just work ourselves back up and out of the funnel, retracing our steps to put that local example in the context of the creative sector in Iowa, the 70,000 jobs that local example helps to illustrate, and then back to the bigger picture at the national level and the 4.7 million American jobs it exemplifies and the $30 billion trade surplus such jobs help contribute to. So even though that example references multiple statistics, I think it also brings the audience, in this case, a member of Congress, along a messaging path that is familiar to them, the relationship of federal funding to the state and the local level. But I'm anchoring it with a tangible local example while also nesting that local angle in the broader context of economic output, assuming that that's a priority of who's listening. So the hope then is that one of those points along the way resonates, or at a minimum puts what we do with federal dollars in a sharper focus. But Brian, the moral of the story here, I think, is that data alone can't carry the conversation. We need to tell a story by localizing and personalizing the numbers. We think it's important to take a page from our proverbial local news stations. So just like when a world event happens, news outlets seek the local angle. So we try to take that same approach when it comes to data.
That's a really good point. I think for all of us, no matter the industry or the place that we're in, to tell a good story, you got to tie it in with a bigger theme. Another thing to think about with all this is graphic visualizations and infographics. Is that something that you've used frequently when presenting and telling stories about data?
It is. Yeah, we use data visualizations where possible, but where it makes sense. I think people comprehend data better when they can picture it, and everybody pictures it maybe a little differently. But it's helpful when we can picture it too. We use a variety of data visualizations to demonstrate different types of grant recipients, for instance, and also find that visualizing our data on a map of Iowa is helpful in demonstrating the geographic impact of not just our dollars, but also our outreach. Sometimes it's as simple as that, which is nothing groundbreaking by any means. But just like the numbers themselves, when it comes to visuals, less is more. So I would say ask yourself what a particular visual says and if it helps to reinforce what it is you're trying to say. Then ask someone else to get an unbiased perspective, or consider a couple variations of the same visual, because we all react differently to different visual cues. I think we can probably both agree, Brian, that we've seen examples of PowerPoint slides dripping with numbers and pie charts and graphs that look more like a subway map than they do a cohesive message of impact. Visual editing is as essential as how you present the data itself.
Yeah, and somebody who's spent some time trying to navigate subways in cities that I don't live in, I can certainly sympathize with that, being lost with those types of pictures. Yeah. So how do you intend for data to shape policy in the future?
Well, that's a great question. I think for us, we see the data, I guess, less about revealing groundbreaking new policy ideas, but more about translating our sector's value and building a bridge to state policy priorities and discussions where the arts maybe get left out from, get traditionally left out of. But that's us and our state, so I would just say that the use of data needs to be authentic to the environment around you.
Great. And I'm sure that we're dealing with folks on this webinar from all across the life cycle, from beginners to experienced people to total veterans, and how to use data. But for those that are at the very beginning, what advice do you have for people who are trying to learn how to use data and apply it to their work?
Yeah, I guess the first bit of advice that we continually remind ourselves of is to just walk before you try to run. Start with smaller or simpler data projects to get more comfortable with the data and to help understand the limitations of your knowledge. We're still figuring this out ourselves. I think we probably tried to boil the ocean at first, and that kind of backfired. So baby steps is the name of the game, I think. And there's always going to be more information and more data available than you will likely need at any one time. I think it's important to not feel like you need to use all of the data sets for every project. When it comes to data, less is more. Audiences can only retain and absorb so much, no matter who you're talking to. And I think another good tip is to just drink responsibly. And what I mean by that is to just use common sense. Correlation is not causation. Don't make claims you can't support. Know your data sources and some degree of the methodology if you can. And present as current data as you can. Otherwise, you just give someone a reason to poke a hole in what it is you're trying to say. And then consider how third-party data can complement information you already collect. And remember that the data isn't there to provide the answer. It's a tool to inform your work and educate yourself and others about the impact of what you do and the environment you work within and make decisions within. Think about how the data can help support and amplify the story you want to tell. That's something that has really hit home for us. But lastly, I would just say don't try to be the expert. Leave that to the actual experts.
Well, thank you, Matt. Those were some really great thoughts about ways to establish impact with data. You've certainly done a great job of that, and I think really listening to your advice help others, as a takeaway, understand that using data is part of a much broader strategy that you can maximize that impact if you really have a strategy, give it some thought in advance, carefully select your data, and then roll it out again with strategy, not just here's the silver bullet that will do it for me. I think we have time for one more question, so let's go back to Brian for a minute. And Brian, do you have another question?
Yeah, I first just want to give credit to Matt. That was a great analogy regarding drink responsibly. When I think of data, I think we should think of it more as like a strong, robust bourbon than as a light beer. It doesn't take a lot of it to have the desired impact. But the one question that I want to add is, Matt, can you think of any data needs that are not currently being met? And just explain what that would be.
That's a good question. I think we just have access to more data now than we ever have before, which brings more opportunity than we've ever had, but also brings the weight of using the data responsibly and the need to be able to speak about it with confidence. I think if we correlate data with fact, I think we can all agree that the facts alone aren't cutting it in today's complex public sector environment. We have to be a little bit of a jack of all trades and deal in hard data and quantitative arguments as much as we do in softer qualitative arguments that our sector is so rich with in order to articulate a 360 snapshot of our own impact. Looking ahead, I guess we want to continue to understand how our various data sets can work together, not only from a messaging standpoint, but also to maybe illuminate some trends about our creative sector, just to help us continue to be responsive with the programs and resources that we offer. I think we're also interested in seeing how we can work with our peers and other state agencies, sharing data to see how that can illuminate trends on the ground, across communities, not just the arts, but communities as a whole. But I think for as much as we do encounter data, we're constantly asking questions to test what we think we know against what we think the data might be telling us. As we've said before, data can't do it alone, and data alone can't make our decisions for us. But we can't do it alone either without the data. So I think the moral of the story is to let the data complement the information that you use to make the decisions you need to communicate the message you need to get across.
Well, really, very much thanks, Matt, for sharing all of your experience and wisdom with us today. It was really nice speaking with you. Thank you for the valuable insight.
Thank you. I appreciated it.
And I want to join Brian in thanking you, Matt, for your great insights, and maybe take a moment here to provide some summary information that I see as takeaways from this conversation. One is that there's a lot of different kind of data out there, and one needs to select it carefully. But in fact, people expect data these days to be a part of any kind of presentation, particularly an advocacy presentation. Also, I heard in the commentary a recommendation that you personalize the data. Do some audience analysis. Who are you talking to? You're going to use data differently, and I think especially in the personalization area, can you reach in and find out what is that specific local activity, local interest a legislator might have that you can respond directly to with data or a story. Also, tailor your data for the audience. If we're talking to Brian Points and his cohort of economists, that's completely different than talking to some people who are brand new to advocacy and perhaps have had not much background in economics, etc. So very, very different. Don't overwhelm people. Sometimes we have the power of multiple data streams and we decide to use each data stream. That's not necessary. You can select the data stream and maybe use 3 charts, not 23 charts. I mean, we sometimes can benefit by trimming back a little bit. And then, of course, use accurate data. If you don't use accurate data, particularly in the advocacy process, that will come back to haunt you, because oftentimes advocates, we get to be our champions, believe us, we hope they do, and then if they find out it's not accurate, it's not timely, and they're embarrassed in some legislative process, that's not really good for anyone. So those are some summaries Brian, do you have anything to add to this list?
Yeah, just a couple more lessons that I've learned in my years doing this kind of work. One little thing you can do to arm yourself for dealing with questions and is just to look up alternative data sources and check in on that same region and that same topic and see what it says. And Matt gave a good outline, Matt or Anthony, excuse me, of the different data sources out there. And if you do that, then when somebody says, well, I read this or I saw that, then you have a response to them. And that's a huge thing that you can do to make just make yourself defensible against any kind of questioning. I also want to touch again on the not overwhelming with data. That's really worth emphasizing that. You need to be ready to talk about a lot of things that will not really end up on your slide deck. So you may have a slide deck that's 5 or 10 slides, but there's a lot of information in your notes or in your head that you're going to talk about around those slides. You don't necessarily expect people to remember, but you need to have. Then there's another set of information that isn't even in your notes. It's just things that you've read and you can refer people to. So really be prepared by doing your research in advance. Lastly, having a source in small print at the bottom of your slide can really go a long way. You don't even have to talk about that. People will see it. And most of the time, if they have a data question or are uncomfortable with the numbers you're presenting, just you having that site there is going to disarm them. They'll say, well, at least I know that they're not making this up and that they're citing a source that some other expert has created. So it gets again back to that point of leaning on the experts rather than always being an expert yourself.
Well, thank you, Brian, and thanks again, Matt. Before we go to questions, I want to ask the participants to go to the CVSuite website, and there are 2 resources there that you might find useful. One is a comparison of the various existing data streams related to art and creative economy. So that's on the site. Another thing on the site that the team's put together for these times is an advocacy toolkit. I know many of you have been involved in advocacy, and you may have your own toolkit, but take a look at this. It will have some additional resources for you that you might find useful. So with that, let's turn now to questions from participants.